All right.
Great. Hi, everyone. If you don't know me, my name's Alper. I'm the Education Content Manager for this year's CodeDay Labs. I'm happy to welcome Ethan, and he will be talking to you guys about game audio and game audio design and his experiences in the field and throughout his career. And this will be an AMA session where you can ask anything to Ethan. Ethan, if you'd like to introduce yourself a little more, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. My name is Ethan Yamashita, and I am still a college student, but I've had the wonderful opportunity to organize and compose for the Digital Future Lab for a game called Seed. And that was my very first experience. And since then, I've stayed somewhat practiced with composing, and I'm still learning a lot, to be honest. There's still a lot that I have to learn, but I just want to have this AMA partially because I want to encourage people who maybe are curious about it and don't know how much work it takes to get in there. And I want to assure them that if someone like me can get there, I'm pretty sure anyone can get there.
Thank you. So Margaret and Pranav, please ask any questions that you might have in the Q&A. This will be about a 30-minute AMA session, so feel free to ask. So to get us started, Ethan, I have a quick question. What is the most intricate sound you've ever made, and how did you make it, and like what was the context for it?
The most intricate sound that I ever made. Gee, that'll be one for my other friends, I suppose, since they've done a lot more specific sound design, whereas I've explored more on the musical side. Granted, I have had to, for example, edit with like some parametrics, for example, the EQ of a ukulele to try to make it um, sound better, at least acceptable for the music. But the biggest one I can think about is probably this one from a song that I made called Nothing Left, where I had to, um, I had to really play with the reverb on this one rain stick that we were recording at the time because it had to sound like static. And what we ended up doing was, well, what I ended up doing was adding a little bit of delay plus reverb plus lowering the parametrics on the higher pitched noise to create a bit of a grainier sound to it. That and like it had to stay consistent and like not just being little tip taps and isolated sounds, but it had to blend together like static, like a waveform.
Great, thank you. We have one more person in the attendees, so if you guys have any questions, again, please feel free to ask. Another question that I had is, how much does audio impact the storytelling ability and like um, effect of a game? And how do you change, or how should I say this, personalize the audio of a game to match the theme or purpose of a game?
And that's a very good question. It can honestly depend depending on the genre, especially since like some, for example, like Tetris, they don't really need storytelling because it's more about like I guess getting across the feel of the game and how the flow is going. Like if it's getting more or less intense, then there's going to be music that fits that and the tempo. Um, as for in my experience, when there is storytelling that is involved, I'd say that music plays somewhere around I say 30% of the storytelling and of just conveying what is supposed to happen, how we're supposed to interpret it. Enough that it's able to help you tell who is the enemy, who is your friend, and whether or not you should be feeling like excited or worried. It really sets the emotion, the value of the game. And I think part of the reason is partially just because tempo has been correlated with the heartbeat of gamers when they're experiencing things. That's been the same with exercise, for example. When you're looking to work out, then usually you tend to play faster music. And by encouraging that in the opposite order, then you encourage people to get excited, to get calmer, to get somber, to get however much you think that their heartbeat should be going at, generally speaking. Um, what was the second part of your question again?
just how do we personalize the audio to match the theme of the game? Like whether it's an FPS or like a platform game or something like that, or it's purely storytelling. Like how do you, I should say, personalize the audio, the music to integrate with that game's thematical elements?
This is one where you have to look very carefully first at the marketing side of things. You have to see what the business is hoping to create for the image of the game, whether they're going to focus on storytelling or on the design. So, like League of Legends, for example, has this interesting way of they intend to have people playing it for hours at a time. And because of that, they needed to make it, uh, I guess, as unique as possible, enough that it wouldn't sound repetitive. And so they end up taking, if I remember right from this one book that I read, they took a lot of different sound bites and would combine it together depending on the types of interactions that you were doing. And so that means that every time you had a League of Legends experience, it would be a completely different one. I might be confusing this with the World of Warcraft, but that is from what my memory serves. And so for me, in my case, I went to my PMs, my project managers, and some of the other business people on the project, and I asked them about what is the main feature of the game, what is the main appeal that we're trying to highlight. Because sometimes storytelling is important, sometimes it's the design, and if it's the design and gameplay, then the League of Legends example is what would apply. You would want to talk with the game designers about the kinds of interactions you'll be having. Otherwise, you want to really go and talk to the artists. You want to talk with the storytellers and the storyboarders to get an idea of what, I guess, what kind of emotions we're supposed to feeling, what is the atmosphere that we want to give. And you talk with both of them regardless. But I'd say that your priority usually depends on what the business people say, business people at the top.
Great, thank you so much, Ethan.
Mm.
So another question was, since many of the people who are watching this video, either right now or the
Oops.
recording of it, might not be video game music composers, but they might want to be video game designers or developers. So how would, or video game audio designers, like the audio effects. So in your experience, did how did you, a video game music composer, interact with those different people at a game dev studio? And what role did you play in that entire planning process, the complex interactions in the game, stuff like that? Sorry if that was a long question.
It might help to write that down just so that I can make sure I can address all the parts of the question there. But I can do what I can and follow with what I can. But so if I remember right, your question is about how do I interact with multiple different teams in order to, I guess, like since I'm a video game music composer, uh, what is my role on the team and what does that look like operating in a group space?
Yeah, exactly. And like, how would someone else who might be a video game designer or developer interact with a video game music composer at their studio in their careers?
Hmm. I would say that I think interacting with the other teams, it was interesting because you always have to have an argument ready about why the role that you do is essential. Just because sometimes if you're not careful, then even if it's from the best intentions from the people above, they can tend to be shelved otherwise. So you need to be ready to advocate for yourself and advocate for the things that you do. And sometimes that can add on a little bit of additional pressure about getting the music content out there. But fortunately, I was with a company that really did value the music and plenty of people who loved video game soundtracks of their own. As for how future developers should interact with video game music developers, I'd say biggest thing I can say is give them insight into how you're working with the audio. What kind of system are you doing with it? What is, especially like sometimes there are standard ways so I've heard about how people loop different soundtracks together, but you really want to make it clear to them like what is your level uh of musical expertise, what is the developer's understanding of it, and you might need to coach the developer, for example, to say like test this on your system or give me access to the system to see how the music loops, because I think that's one of the biggest things. We don't always get to see the context of how our music is used until they just do it. And the biggest thing a developer can do is give some transparency about how the music that we make is going to be used in the game so that we can edit and tweak it. And we get our MVPs out there, of course, but we want to be able to do our job right and do the best that we can to make as cohesive of an experience as possible. And we can't do that if we don't have some sort of playthrough that we can run through. That's the biggest thing I would say about it. Other than that, I would say that the the musicians are usually the ones at the very bottom of the chain in terms of they're the ones who come in knowing the least because they aren't often the people who are creating the experience as much as they are translating. And that can depend. And that is something that I think can change with some people and their level of entitlement with the music and how much it can drive the game. But in my experience, I often was the one who had to translate versus create. So I wasn't the one that people came to saying, like the art team didn't come to me saying, what was the tone of your music? And I will make a piece of art based on that, for example. I came to them and then they shared with me what they were doing. And then I made my music based off of that.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Thank you. That was a very good answer for that question. I'm so sorry for the long question.
No worries.
Um, so what has been the most challenging experience in your career, or so far, I should say, with composing music and collecting or composing sounds for video games?
I say the biggest one for me is one that I don't think a lot of musicians have to worry about as much. Unless maybe you are in the weird club like me. But I think that I grew up with a lot of musicians who had really good ears and they were just able to be able to train those ears so that, for example, they've heard the G chord enough that they could recognize it right off the bat from whatever song they wanted, right? And I never had that ability, and I trained for that ability for sure. I could tell relative pitches, for example, with enough time. Um, but it was something that I still nonetheless struggle with very heavily, and it's influenced my style a lot just because it affected how I learned. So the biggest thing, therefore, is just for me struggling with all the different things that composers don't usually struggle with and succeeding at the things that most of the composers don't usually succeed at, which in my case, I studied a lot of music theory to compensate for my lack of innate sense of how to move along with the song and how to translate how that felt. Like for example, it took training for me to recognize that a four was meant to be like somewhat dissonant and leading into the fifth, for example, uh, or that the second chord was minor. I had to read that up and then use that knowledge to build up my understanding. And so different understandings of how my music sounds is very challenging for me because I just didn't know how it sounded to other people. I only knew that I put in this combination, and so theoretically, it should feel this kind of way. I guess if we wanted to solidify it to a single experience, my biggest one was actually for making music for the end of our live streams to market the video game, which nonetheless had to have a video game feel to it. But I just had no idea what complex emotion I was supposed to create at the very end and what base components made that up.
Thank you. Let's see. Again, if anyone out of the audience wants to ask a question, please feel free to. I had a question, but I think I lost it. This is more general about the game dev industry, but what are
Mhm.
some tips on making it into the game dev industry or a game dev studio? Um, since there's a bunch of different roles and a bunch of different paths to get to those roles in a game dev studio. So, from your perspective, what's the best way? And also, since you've worked with other people like game developers, artists, you said, what have you seen that is a common path?
Gee, I can't really say whether there are any common paths or another. You see indie developers, for example, people who just do it all solo. Then you see other people who come together just because they're a band of friends who want to just make their dreams come true. I can't say for sure where I want to go with this, and I'm trying my best to hold the question inside my head. But just remember that you're not alone. The ideas that you want to make, the themes that you share. I can't say whether or not I can agree with every single thematic message that every single video game gives out. Um, but regardless of if I agree with you or disagree with you about the content you want to put out, there are people, you will find people who are out there like you, who think like you, and who also believe that this is something that needs to happen. And they'll come from a variety of different places. Biggest tip I can get for people who are trying to enter into the game developer industry is, I guess, just decide what kind of person you want to be. Because I'm not going to say that you have to talk to people. There are plenty of people who want to keep their ideas to themselves. It's just hard work that you got to put in one way or the other. There's no shortcut or secret to life that you can do about that. But what that means also is that really anything is possible if you put your mind to it. It's a lot of hard work, and I don't envy the person who goes at this solo. And that's not my preference. But for the people who do want to, that's something that like you've seen a couple of different times, like with Undertale, that this can happen and beautiful games come out of this. So I don't want anyone to get discouraged and think that they have to team up with people. But even if you go solo at this, I think you still need people for feedback and people who can guide you through the different skills that you need. So don't be afraid to go out and engage and receive feedback of all things about the different features that you want to include, the designs you want to function in your gameplay. You still need that, whether you're doing this for a final project or just for testing things out, because you'll get insights and it's up to you on if you want to invite them onto your project or not. But I think you still have to ask those vital questions because you have to read your audience and you want to see about what kind of things you think are going to be valuable for the people that you want to write for.
Thank you, Ethan. That was a great answer. Um, so how do we make gaming and the game dev industry more inclusive? Have you seen any of this in, for example, Digital Future Lab, sorry, or throughout your other parts of your career? How do we make it more inclusive to more people of different backgrounds, of varying interests? What would you say for that?
I would say personally for me, one of the biggest obstacles of getting into video game music was just not really knowing that it existed. I knew that it was there, but I never knew that it was actually a thing. And I feel like if there was more terminology and more of this kind of music in classical training, for example, or in musical lessons, I feel like that could be a nice jumping off point for people to get into this, especially just because the music schools that we go to, they form how we understand music. And I've talked with people who don't have the same kind of training as me, and they see music differently, for better or for worse. It is how it is, and they have their tastes. But that's what I've learned is very deeply ingrained in me. And if we're not careful about how we manage the education um, of people who are getting into music, piano, guitar, flute, violin, and bass, if we're not careful about that, then we can sometimes think that there's only one way to do music. And I've had to face some elitist views that like lyric music, vocal music is the only type of real music, and otherwise anything that doesn't have words is meaningless. I don't believe that's true, of course, but I grew up a lot around people who had those kinds of views, and I never therefore explored video game music. I think that's the best way for people, I think, overall to be more accepting about it and therefore be able to encourage people of all sorts of different backgrounds into this. If we want to talk purely about like if there are any barriers that keep specific groups of people out, I don't know if I would be able to say, because honestly, video game music, in my experience, has been sort of a grassroots thing, a sort of thing that a guilty pleasure that perhaps only people on the outside or on the margins can feel like, just because it's the music for the minority, it feels like. And if anything, people who are struggling and maybe in different minority groups, I feel like they will bond more with video game music, if anything. So I'm not too worried about that. I'm more worried about making it in a way where people can feel free to express their passions, to believe in themselves that the music that they listen to is real, and that they therefore themselves have real tastes and a reason to put out their opinions on music.
Thank you so much. So you slightly touched on this, but where did you find and discover your love for doing this? Like at what point were you like, I want to become a video game music composer? I'm asking this because some people don't know what they want to do in their careers and um, don't really, if they have a bunch of interests, don't know which way to go. So what's the best way of discovering this interest and this idea that I want to do this for the rest of my life and I will enjoy it?
Mm. Probably just have people who oppose you, because I think like I remember my brother is not the biggest fan of this kind of music, and I think that that was part of how I got into it, because siblings, and if they don't like it, then you end up loving it anyways, and that's just kind of some stubbornness that just happens. He's a good man, don't worry. But as for sustaining long-term interests, I would say that for anything with music, really, it's just getting an instrument or just listening to it with people. The biggest thing is just being able to drive your experience with the music, whether that's like for me, before I knew how to play Professor Layton, let's see, the main theme of Professor Layton, I would sometimes just be off to myself, either studying or just closing my eyes and listening to the music and wondering, how does this work? And just all those questions, they never really stopped, and that's why I'm still in this. I continue to have questions about, why do these certain drum beats work? Why can Yoko Shimomura put in an electrical guitar in along with all this orchestra business in Xenoblade, for example? Like, how does that even, why, who would have the idea to do that? Or Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, what exactly made this into chord music? And how did they decide that this is the kind of feel that they should go with in order to, I guess, perfectly convey the scene of a blue suited man pointing their finger uh, and saying objection at the top of their voice? So never stop having questions. If there is something that works in music, then I would say ask why. And when you ask why, you try to replicate it. When you try to replicate it, you get into composing. When you get into composing, you ask more questions. That's what happened with me. And I'm sure at least a couple of you will have a similar experience.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great background story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, so we have 15 minutes remaining in our AMA session. So again, if the audience wants to ask any questions, please feel free to. If not, I'll continue to ask some questions. So let's see. What is your favorite piece that you've done? What was your favorite piece that you've done in your career?
It's been a very short career, if I'm going to be honest. So, I mean, I don't know how much I can say, but I'd say that my favorite piece that I worked on was Wake. It was a song called Wake for the Digital Future Lab. And that
Mm,
was interesting because I think that was after someone gave me this compliment that they never knew what they were going to expect from me. So I decided to try to make something that they wouldn't expect purposefully, even though I didn't intentionally do it. But it was a fun project, partially just because I think that that song represented all of the different things that I learned in the studio, including an emphasis on keeping and maintaining simple motifs because I was always trying to overcomplicate it. But the truth is that if anything, complexity, you don't have to worry about learning the complex things of music because it's the simple things that people will remember. So I tried to keep that as a primary feature of this music.
thank you. Yeah, I think that's a great um, common theme to go by.
Hmm.
So what, how should I ask this? Sorry about that. What was your background going into this? So I know you said you enjoyed listening to music and it was kind of a relaxing factor, and you always question why music works, how they came up with that. But did you play an instrument, for example, or what, did you have any experience with composing before dedicating your life to video game music composing? What was your background?
Like I said, I was classically trained, so I had classical music, and I played piano for the most part. I It took me a long time to learn the first piece of music, the Professor Layton theme. And so until I could learn it, then I was basically just listening to this piece over and over again in my earbuds. But gee, I'm trying to remember the question. So you were asking about my background, how I got into this, and what got me started specifically with composing.
Composing for video games, yeah.
Composing for video games. Yeah. So I guess the other context I should give about this is that I was classically trained, but I also didn't feel like classical music was a style that fit me. And I never really knew because all my friends had these references off the top of their head that they could think of. One Direction, Selena Gomez, Justin Bieber at the time. Yes, I'm somewhat old. And then like maybe you hear about Ice Cube or just maybe rappers. And I wasn't experienced with that. I didn't have the same vibe. And I mean, they were music. It was music. And like I had no complaints about it, but it didn't feel like the music that spoke to me until video game music came in. And I think that the more that I looked at it, the more fascinating it was for me, just because it was such a powerful control over the type of experience I could have. Everything that was down to the rhythm, that was the instrumental choice. And I was reading about this when I first figured it out, and or when I first learned that there was such thing as video game music. And it just stunned me just how much intention went into each piece of music, every single note, the instruments that were chosen, the types of modification that was done to it. It was, yeah, and even the different basic theory that was chosen to represent it, such as like bossa nova being used for different waiting rooms, or like the Wii Shop theme, for example. Um, it was just a blending of everything, to be honest. And I wanted to be able to have a place in there because I learned piano because I wanted to control my experiences with music. I wanted to be able to decide what note is played, when it is, let's see, how hard it is played, and what sequence of notes come after. And once I found video game music, I found a language that I could learn versus classical music still being an enigma. And I've grown to appreciate classical music in other genres, for example, more and more as I've gone into video game music, because it's ultimately a blending of different genres, if I'm going to be honest. It all depends on the game. But that is the language and the context with which I got to see music in application, in live application. And that was an experience that I wanted to be a part of. So I got started. I started just researching stuff and didn't have anyone. I found MuseScore first, for example, and then I just started playing notes on the piano and seeing what kind of stories I could create. I didn't know much. I didn't have any experience with coding. I just played notes and now I'm here.
That's a very, very cool background story. Thank you so much for sharing that again. And hopefully that gives somewhat of an idea to the audience who's watching this. So I think the last two questions that I'll ask you will be about motivation and in your field and during your work. So my first question is this. When you get stuck, since it seems like video game music composing is a very complex task and there's a lot of different sides at it, and you don't know, sometimes you don't know what the theme will be, sometimes you don't know how it'll be used, like you said. So when you get stuck, when you don't know how to go forward with a piece, what do you do to motivate yourself to generate new ideas, and to just push forward?
A lot of the time, what I would do is I would just record or I would just loop the section or different sections of the piece over and over and over and over again. And I just close my eyes. And because I've listened to video game music enough, and this is something that I did have to train, but when I close my eyes and I let the music loop, I let it go through and then I pause it when I think it's near the end. And then I see what my mind fills in for the rest of it. And it's something simple to do. It isn't something that requires too much focus just because I'm closing my eyes. So it's not like I can get distracted from my phone or anything like that. But if motivation is more of a serious issue, then I think what I often just do is just take a step out, take a break, and then maybe even move on to a different idea for a different project and test it out. And sometimes that one is the one that works out better. Um, but you can't give up on ideas too much because otherwise I've found you just keep hopping from idea to idea. So I'd say max out at 3 ideas and switch between those periodically when you get stuck.
Thank you. And so my last question will be this, unless again, anyone else has any other questions. Um, do you suffer from imposter syndrome throughout your career, throughout the creation of your pieces? And if so, how do you combat that? How do you dampen it down? Or what other motivational issues do you suffer from? And how have you tried to fix them?
Hmm. I honestly have not struggled with imposter syndrome to my knowledge, just because every single bit of music that I've done has had to go through a rigorous process of just like you don't give people a complete piece and then just expect them to like say this is perfect and then it's like, oh, I just kind of faked my way through it. I might have like stolen these different musical ideas. No, I often had those torn apart and say you need to like boost this part here, you need to quiet this section over here. The strings need to be more poignant in their expression, and everything that I think every single musician has to go through that kind of rigorous process. And I think that does help with rooting out the different imposter syndrome, just because one, we're all working together, and two, it's like it's more believable, I think, this kind of person that we kind of end up seeing ourselves as people who just constantly have different musical feedback, because also with music there's no one way to do it. And so ultimately what my piece is a huge mix mash of other people and their thoughts and opinions. If you're worried that you might think that that is only you, sorry, that is like the piece that you're doing is only a mix mash a mix of other different people versus not having any of yourself. I say that it's still up to you to create that idea. And that is the idea that you created that inspired other people to do it. It all started from the notes that you put down. And so even if you don't necessarily think that it's any of your music as much as it is other people's feedback and critique. It's still the base that you created that led to this whole branch of possibilities. And if you ever feel like it's not you, then you can always go back and take the pieces away and make something for yourself on your own time. And sometimes it can feel weird just because like maybe it's just like you're trying to explore a different self and a different possibility that maybe just isn't right. But music, there's no wrong way necessarily. People will remember only where you begin and where you end. And so whatever you do, you can make alternative work. And you've seen other people copy others. It's just common in the musical industry. So you can't let yourself get down about that. Again, it's not about what's right or wrong in music. Sometimes you gotta just fake it until you get there and you realize that other people do accept and respect you and the music you see as music versus just being a mix mash or a jumble of different ideas. They'll see it as music more or less.
Thank you so much, Ethan. That was a very motivational answer and very inspirational too. I think that will be my last question. Thank you so much, Ethan, for spending all of your time today with us and answering all of those questions. I really hope it'll be helpful to the audience who's watching this, either right now or during the recording. And thank you for sharing your experiences and your background with us. And hopefully that'll help to guide and inspire other people too.
Would you mind if I leave a little closing message?
Yeah, of course, feel free to.
Okay. I can't say about how, thank you, by the way. I can't say about how many people are like me when I was younger, because I didn't discover video game music until I was 14. And I have been hearing that music since much, much earlier in my life. And so for all of you people hearing and seeing and being aware that video game music exists, talk about it. And maybe, just maybe, there are those shy people who will feel encouraged because they realize that they're not alone and that this is something that exists. I never knew to bring it up. But since you guys are here, maybe you guys will know to bring it up and you might just save someone's life. Because I just didn't really know what I was going to do from that point on. And I didn't know if music was even for me until I found this. You might just create the next Nobuo Uematsu. Who knows? But it's got to start from somewhere. And that's a power that you guys have.
Thank you so much for that closing message, Ethan. That was a great closing message and very motivational too. Yeah, so like Ethan said, please make sure to spread your interests, talk about your passions with those that you know might be interested in it, and just enjoy what you do. Right, Ethan?
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
Great. And Ethan, if you have any other closing message to say, feel free to say it. If not, that's okay too.
Yeah, if you want to get connected with me, again, I'm not the most professional, so I probably can't give you access into becoming like a composer for Nintendo, but I can always help give people a start and a push in the right direction. I didn't go over all the different technical things that one could do, such as different beginner digital audio workspaces, for example. And we can get into that. We can get into MIDI controllers. We can get into how to compose for orchestra and so forth. I'm just not covering all the technical stuff here. But if you need help, then I can at least either give help or maybe point you to someone who can do it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Ethan's LinkedIn will be in the event description, either on the CodeDay Labs website or on the YouTube channel. So in the YouTube description, I should say. So if you have any questions, as Ethan said, please feel free to reach out to him. And thank you so much again, Ethan, for all of your help, all of your sharing, and teaching us today about video game music composing.
My pleasure. It's always a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and I can talk about this for hours. And I bet there are many of you guys out there who can talk about this for hours too.
Definitely. Definitely. Thank you so much again. Have a
Right.
great day, everyone. Bye, Ethan.
All right. Bye,
Bye.
Altair.
Bye.
Let me see. I just need to find the leave button. Yeah, thanks again. All right,
Of
see you.
course. Bye.